Hello and welcome back to Dry Conversations. Joining me today is Tim Dooner. You probably know him from What the Truck with Freight Waves. He's an award-winning podcaster and a radio host who's currently an executive creator at Freight Waves. So welcome, Dooner.
Thank you for having me. We've known each other for a while. We've walked some same paths and maybe more similar paths than we even know. I think that's what we're going to get into the show. But for people who don't know, we both used to work at Freightways together back in a previous life. But we haven't seen each other in a while. Last time I saw you was at a conference like 2 years ago. So it's cool to reconnect.
Yeah, and soon we just learned we'll be reconnecting again at the end of the month in person. So that's very exciting.
Matt's down in Louisville. Today's the last day to register for free, I think, too. So if you want to, even when you do have to pay though, like Matt's isn't like the Freight Tech conferences where it's like $3,000 or something. It's like even when you have to pay, I think it's like $50 at most.
Yeah.
So it's really just a dedication of your time.
Yeah, and I paid for the extra add-on, and it was $49. Yeah, so right on the money.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah. So I wanted to reach out to you because, like you said, we have similar paths, and I bet there's more similarities than what we realize. We just never sat down and had this conversation in person. So I figured, why not have it and record it?
Sure. Let's do it.
Yeah. So I did ask if there were key moments that you wanted to talk about. Then you mentioned open season, and I want to start with that. Where did that come from?
Open season?
Yeah.
Oh, I just meant like you could ask me whatever you like.
Okay, great.
I just meant like whatever you felt like asking. Shoot away.
Okay, great. Well, then I'll slide right into something that I gained an immense amount of respect for you and what you're doing and what you stand for, and that was your TEDx Chattanooga talk. I would love to start there, maybe a high level overview of what that was about.
That was such a emotional moment for me. In 2016, I got fired from a sales job in freight. I've had bad problems with alcohol all my life. When I was a teenager, my parents went away, I ended up getting too drunk at my friend's house, passed down the train tracks, ended up in a hospital, stopped drinking for a couple of years after that, got to college, it was there. And then I was just kind of off and running. With addiction. And then in 2016, I lost a freight sales job, and we were about 3 weeks away from having our second son. I had no idea what to do other than I had sales PTSD at this point, and I didn't want anything to do with sales. They gave me a live check when they fired me, and I was excited. I was like, oh, I can go buy a bottle of Tito's and everything. And I did that for the next 2 weeks, but I was just getting sicker and feeling worse. And obviously it wasn't improving anything. It wasn't taking any of the anxiety away of this baby being on the way. And it was very obvious I was just trying to mask the pain. I'd been able to do that for years, with alcohol. But when you're at the bottom, and you're put up against a wall like that, I had to figure something else to do. And there was someone who was very influential in my life. He was one of my first bosses out in California when I worked in the record industry. And he had been open about his issues with alcohol and addiction. And him doing that is something that always stuck in my mind, and him being brave enough and public enough to say that had always stuck out in my mind. So when there was one night in late October, early November of 2016, and I reached out, I emailed him in the middle of the morning, in the middle of the night, and I was like, hey, if I don't check into rehab, you need to contact my wife and my parents and my best friend and hear their numbers and hear their information. I have a big problem. And the only way I've been able to put myself to go back to rehab is at 3 a.m, well, pissed drunk. And he got back and he was like, whatever you need for support. And then, I told my wife the next morning, I was like, we got to go into rehab and I got to figure out. And, thankfully my mom helped me and my wife helped me. And they started calling up the health insurance that we still left and everything. And I got put into this place called McLean, which is the same location that the book and the movie Girl Interrupted are based around, but it's a dual diagnosis facility for mental health and alcohol addiction.
Yep.
And it was so impactful. I went to rehab back in 2009, 7 years prior to this, but I had the wrong mentality. I went in where if I could not drink for 90 days, I don't have a problem. Yeah. And obviously that I did have a problem, and that didn't work because all that happened is after 90 days, I kept,
right.
I kept recalibrating. And one thing I learned from that instance too is you got to get rid of some people in your life when you're in recovery. Because the girl I was dating was the one who was like, "How are you going to celebrate your 90th day? What are you going to drink?" And I was like, and at the time I hadn't really considered. I was like, maybe I'll just keep going. And then I was like, okay, alcoholic brain starting to kick in. Oh
Yep.
my god, and then I was like, so I fell back in, and I'm not like blaming her necessarily. This is my own weakness, but your failures need to allow you to grow stronger. And knowing that, like, I made a lot of different choices the second time I went into rehab. And it was really important. This time I had kids. This time I had a newborn that was coming right on the way. And
Yeah.
therapist there, and he's like, well, what are you gonna, he's like, because we're talking about ADD and anxiety and how to treat self-medicating and those kind of things. And he's like, well, what's giving you a lot of anxiety right now? I was like, well, I lost this sales job. I don't want to get into sales. I want to get back into freight operations. I can't get paid enough. I want to get into marketing and kick ass in that. But I have no way to do it. I'm in my 30s. I don't have any marketing experience. Decide like the social proof. You can go just by going on social media and seeing that I do pretty well. By the time I wasn't like as built up or as established. I was actually being stalked by someone. So I was kind of private. I wasn't even that much on social media. But I was like, F it. This is a whole new me, whole new world. And that's when I started the show called The Shipping Pod with a buddy of mine called Ryan Dooley. And he was there for like 9 episodes and quit on me. But it was cool. That like made me start getting guests. My dad was my first guest, always been the biggest supporter, was the first person to be like, the industry needs like a conversational show about freight that's not just webinars. I can't pay attention.
Right.
It's like, yeah, me either. So he was like really on board. And then this dude named Steve Aborn, he heard it too. And he gave it. So like for me, podcasting has been like a big part of my recovery. So going through all this, getting over to FreightWaves, and then in the studio that I helped build, to record my TEDx there, because this was during COVID. I didn't get to do the TEDx stage. We had to do it on site, but like that made it even more emotional because I had taken myself from like this super freaking dark place to the most successful I'd ever been in my life. And this amazing studio that we built in this great position with plenty of growth that has still been flourishing. And there's a lot of emotion that comes out of me when I think about like my job.
Yeah. And I appreciate you, first of all, for sharing that and being vulnerable all over again, because it's a very emotional journey, and that shows up in different ways, I think, for each of us and how we talk about it and what we do about it later on.
Absolutely. Well, the addictive brain, right? And I know you've gone through your own struggles, and it reminds me of sort of that, but like so much of your life when you're addicted to alcohol or probably anything. For me, my problem was alcohol.
Yeah.
Everything revolves around it, especially if you drink every day. Like how you wake up and feel in the morning revolves around it. What you do at night revolves around it. Your social occurrences revolve around it. The types of events you choose to go to revolve around it. And all of the bullshit and trouble you get into revolves around it. It's such a horrible influence. And I'm not the kind of person that tells people not to drink. There's plenty of people who can drink like responsibly.
Yeah.
I personally couldn't. I know plenty of people I had to distance my life from who can't, because when you're quitting, when you're around someone who's just getting like completely trashed, it's just painful. Like to this day at events, there's an old saying, hang around the barbershop, you'll end up with a haircut. If you ever see me you'll never see me out late at Manifest. You'll never see me out late at F3. You'll never see me out late at any event. I'm like in the hotel room by 9 o'clock.
Yeah, that's actually something I started doing, because in my last few roles, I do go to events. And that hasn't always been the case in my career. But somebody asked me, like, what do you do at your events, to fill in your time? And I was like, oh, I bring a whole skincare routine. I pretend like this is a spa treatment day. And for me, that allows me to feel like I'm doing something for myself, like I'm not missing out. But yeah, it's a total lifestyle change. And I think some people, there's a misconception, of what addiction really is, of like, just stop. And it's like, well, I appreciate that. I have thought of that. It's a little bit more complicated. There's something in my thought processes that's broken, and it takes time and help to kind of redirect where that's going to go and what that's going to look like for me. And I think the other one is that everything will be the same. And I would love to tell somebody that's struggling that it would be, but it's not, because like you said, there were people in my life that influenced my behavior, although it was my behavior. And some of them, I stopped drinking and they're like, you're not fun anymore. I don't want to invite you to this thing. I don't want to stay out past a certain time. So that naturally limited the relationships in my life, but it also opened up opportunity for me to build new ones with people that had a common goal. And I think that was that was a game changer for me when I started making friends that were also sober people, or at least just didn't drink by choice.
Yeah, it's and this is what people don't sort of tell you. They're like, okay, going into rehab or taking control of your addiction, it doesn't fix you immediately. Anything you were self-medicating or not dealing with or not processing that you were just drinking, because what happens in addiction too is you don't progress very much. Because
Yeah.
a part of addiction is you're trying to stay that baseline. Like I stayed in a crappy job for a few years just because like that's my paycheck. That's how I buy my alcohol. I know how to
Mhm.
get to work. I know how to get back home. I can sustain the thing that's most important to my subconscious, which is that, and that's why you want to route it out so bad, because it'll completely alter your decision making and trap you in the sort of low quality types of interactions. But that hard part too, and you're 100% right, most people strengthen their bonds with maybe their family, their wife, or their kids that's closest to them. But some of your friends, some of your best friends, you might not really ever see them again.
Yeah.
And that's just reality. Like, because you only hung out with them when you were messed up for
Yeah.
years. They were drinking buddies, and you find that out really quick when you put the plug in the jug. And that, like, year one of addiction is freaking brutal. I'm not going to like sugarcoat it. It is horrible.
Yeah. It is. And I don't know about you, but that was probably the loneliest and most confusing time of my life, and that's after years of being in active addiction. And I used to isolate myself, right, to because I didn't want to put it all out on the table for everybody. I really struggled with keeping people close to me, because of my actions and the consequences of them. But then when I made the decision to change, to heal, to grow, to become a sober person, it was a totally different type of isolation. And that's why I think it's not for the faint of heart. You really have to want to do it for yourself. And that was something that nobody told me about. Nobody prepared me for in that first year. For me, I would even say 2 years, because I'm really introverted and I have a hard time putting myself out there. So really my first 2 years, I struggled to find people, period.
Yeah, it's weird. As someone like I host a show and I talk to people, and it seems like I'm incredibly social, but I have like the worst social anxiety. I hate big groups. I hate like big conferences. I hate being around like 8 people or more. Like I might like when my show, I'm just talking intimately to one other or two other people, I'm not talking to like on stage is good too. I can talk to 1,000 people, but I like just like on the floor surrounded by a bunch of people, it kind of, I don't know. I feel just weird. And I had to relearn a lot of skills. The other hard thing too, and I want to know if you had to deal with this too, is like, you don't know what to do with yourself. Like a lot of my day revolved around drinking. Like it would be like, it's noon. Let's go out to lunch and have a few drinks. And that would kill a few hours. And at night, like, oh, maybe we'll go out to dinner or order a pizza. Then we'll have some, like, drinking solved everything. Like all my free time,
Mhm.
it solved that. And like, when you don't have that, it's like, what do I do? I don't even want to go to a restaurant now. I'm not like, what do we do if we don't drink? And it takes a while to rebuild those skills, and it does not feel natural at all at first. In fact, it sucks. It still sucks in some ways.
Yeah. There's so I also, it took a team to keep me sober. I know a lot of people, they don't just like do it by themselves, right?
No,
So for
you
me,
have to be accountable.
there were different types of like therapists and doctors involved in my journey. And one of them told me, Winnie, have you tried just being curious about it? Have you tried sitting down and reintroducing yourself to yourself? And I said, no, because that sounds crazy. And she said, well, why don't you take yourself out on dates and figure out what it is that you love to do? And through that, I am back in ballet, something I did as a very small child, and learning new skills and taking care of myself in that way. I learned that I love to cook, and I love to cook with weird foods, and I can't follow a recipe, so I just figure it out in the kitchen. I rediscovered my love for being outside. I was one of those kids, go outside, they close the door, and like that's what you're doing today. That age group. So I forgot how much I loved just being outside and just sitting and listening to music. These really seemingly mundane things, that before I just totally missed, right? Because like you said, all my time was consumed with alcohol. If I was doing them, I wasn't in the right state of mind, or I didn't remember it. And when I first got sober, I thought that's really boring. Like I'm really uncomfortable just sitting with myself. And once I started practicing just sitting with myself, then I started learning more about myself. So I really appreciate somebody telling me or suggesting, why don't you just be curious about who you are, and don't judge it. Whatever thought pops into your head, whatever idea you may have, don't judge it. Just let it happen. See where it takes you.
Yeah, I mean, look, accountability is so important, and that's why I sent that email that night to my
Yeah.
family, my old boss, and my wife, so I can't get out of it in the morning when the addiction is like, no, 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 you're feeding me, you can't cut this off. I mean, fortunately, what's helped too is like my two best friends now are my sons, and they're 10 and 8, and they're sober, so like it's kind of awesome. And like that has made recovery so much
Yeah.
easier too, having them around, because it's like there's like 1,000 different things I can do. I don't have to think about myself anymore. Like I
Yeah.
can, like, it's, well, what will I do for them? What will I do for somebody else? Like I have a hard time thinking for myself without like something destructive coming to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, that was the next evolution of that thought, right? Then I meet people and doing those hobbies. And part of what I have to do is a type of service work. I was told, like, it's the secret service. You never tell anybody what you're doing, but you go out there and you help people to the best of your ability. And if that's responding to a message on LinkedIn that says I'm struggling too, what do I do? Then that's what that looks like that day. But yeah, my best thinking got me where I'm at, and that was not a good place to be. And I agree, the accountability piece is huge. And I said earlier, I really struggled finding people. I'm in a group text now with about 6 women, and we check in every day with each other, and they know everything about me, and there's absolutely no shame. And that was a big one for me to overcome. And I get to like learn about their lives and support them. And it's kind of taught me how to have relationships kind of all over again.
You know, one thing I have to give someone a lot of credit for too, and made it so much easier to do like that TEDx at the studio. Everything was my boss, Craig Fuller. During my first day of initiation, when I got hired, he had all of us in a room and everything, and he's introducing himself in the company, and he mentioned that he'd been sober for years, actually a couple years
Mhm.
longer than me. And I immediately went up to him and shared a little bit of my story with him, and told him about it. And it's so cool when someone in leadership or someone at a little bit higher that you're looking up at
Right.
tells you that like this is cool and this happens at this level too, because it allows everyone down below to, okay, this is an open topic, we can discuss this
Yeah.
and we can share. And in our industry, and if you've been to events, people drink way too freaking much. A lot of people get messed up. I don't think there's like a single like Freightways event where some stupid sales rep didn't get too drunk and get fired. It happens probably across every company at every single event. And I used to be the moron up at events in Boston, like throwing up in elevators on the way to events, making a complete and utter embarrassment of myself. And I know that some of us have to go through it to see the other side, but people are watching. It's fun to be sober too, because you could, like, at a certain point, you see everyone turn into like a moronic degenerate, and you're like, okay, now I know that side of you.
Yep. Those are really humbling moments where I'm like, if that's what you're like, I can't imagine what it was like watching me. So
Yeah,
good.
and I don't mean to like crack on people. It's a terrible thing, when you're in a like it's a type of addiction that can go on for years, because
Yeah.
you have to take that accountability. You have to like take that step, and also you have to have a little like pride in the decision you made, that I'm not going to go back on this. I'm not going to disappoint all these other, even if you're like, you don't care about disappointing yourself. If you make yourself accountable to everyone else, maybe you care
Right.
about disappointing them.
Right. And I love that you said that you had a boss. Well, I guess we had a
Yeah.
boss that supported that, whether or not they're sober. That I have been in companies where they wouldn't let me come in 30 minutes early and then leave 30 minutes early to make it to like a therapy appointment in my early recovery. And I think I don't know if that was I don't know where that stemmed from, but in the rest of my career, I have had such phenomenal people around me. It quickly became something that I learned to just get over, right? Like I'm so nervous to tell them what are they going to think of me? They're going to regret hiring me, and just all of these thoughts. And I finally just ripped the band-aid. And Freightwaves was the first company where I walked in and sat down, and it was at the time it was Phil Moody. And I
Yeah.
said, I'm in recovery, and some days I'm going to have to leave a little bit early. And I just need you to know that. And some days are a little bit harder for me than others. So I feel like you should know that part about me. So please have grace if I ever ask for time off. I promise I will only do it if it's an emergency. And didn't think twice. Oh, sure. Thanks for telling me. Is there anybody else that needs to know? And I was like, oh, I maybe I don't know. And and from that point forward, I've really been met at every job I've had with incredibly loving responses. And I really hope that that becomes the norm at some point.
That's been one of the few benefits of COVID. If some of the younger listeners here, they weren't in this industry 2019 or earlier, this
Mhm.
was one of the most like draconian BS industries to work. I don't care if you're like a 3PL, a freight brokerage, or anything. They would be like 8 to 5, like hardcore. Like if you called in sick, you'd like walk into like evil eye from like everyone on the floor. And this was like 3 different brokers I worked at. I'm like, what the hell
Yeah.
is wrong with this business? Man, we need to like chill out. Sometimes like we get sick time. And if you know, like one of the ones I worked at, they would freak out every single freaking year because they'd be like, why is everyone keeping their vacation time to the last 2 weeks of December? And it's because if we take it any earlier, we all get death glares from everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And, heaven forbid, at one of the jobs I was at, you take a 35-minute lunch instead of a 30-minute lunch.
Oh
You
man.
clock back in, you have to stay 5 minutes late or else. Like, it's the it was a different world. It
Yeah,
was
like
a
there would
different
be they
world.
would talk like some of the ladies there, like they would have kids, right? And they would have to like go get their kid from like school. So they'd have to leave at like 3:30 or 3:45. But
Mhm.
they'd come in early. But people would still complain and talk so much s about like, why do they get to do that? Why do they get their privilege? Why do they get to do this and that? It was so toxic in a lot of these places. I'm glad I hear that they've loosened up at least a little
Yeah.
bit and they like allow people for like some, and I'm not like nobody was abusing this. Like I'm talking about like people are so freaking scared to use time. They literally wouldn't use it at all until the end of the year.
Yep. And like you said, a lot of people, they weren't abusing it, right? They're just trying to be honest about it and just like accommodate a little bit. But,
Yeah.
thank goodness COVID did, I think, force people to lighten up. And then I think we also saw other people that maybe were really uptight kind of relax for the first time in a while because they had to learn to adapt to something that was really unfamiliar and really uncomfortable. So yeah, I am thankful for the outcome of that. And COVID happened in the time frame that I was at FreightWaves. So, like I said, from that point forward, I had nothing but great experiences. And luckily, it was early enough in my recovery that it didn't deter me from my path. Like, I felt strong enough to say, I can still do this.
I'm so happy that I was sober going into COVID. I can't
Me too.
going into that as an alcoholic would have been like such a playground. Like
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people ended up addicted to drugs and alcohol during that time period because of the isolation and just the ease of access and the boredom. And I'm telling you, when that addiction gets you, it's almost like you just start managing hangovers, you know? It's like you're just trying to manage that balance of like blood alcohol level in there so you're not complete garbage every single day. And I don't wish it on anybody. Like if you have trouble with addiction right now and you think you need help, you probably do. And I
Yeah.
know it takes a lot of effort and like we and I have both said it takes like accountability, but
Mhm.
don't make the mistake that some of us made. Like, don't go drunk driving. Don't like I never got pulled over or arrested or anything like that. But I probably should have at times. I got away with stuff I should not have gotten away with. I got stuff that I would lose my mind if I heard my sons did that. Just things that
Mhm.
completely embarrassing, completely disgusting stuff. And I'm so glad that that chapter is done.
Yeah. Do you have advice for anybody that maybe is sober curious at this point, or um, B, words of wisdom for somebody that has just gotten started?
It, when you first start, it kind of feels like pink cloud because like the first couple weeks, because you're not used to not being hungover every day, especially if you drank a lot. I was a big vodka drinker, and at first it feels pretty good, but it's a long haul. It's an everyday battle. I know it's a cliche to say it's every single day at a time, but it really is, and it's something that you have to consider. And like in my brain, I just make it binary. I don't eat fish. I don't drink alcohol. Like it's not like, oh, I touch a little bit of fish or I take a sip here. No, my brain has to either be yes or no. I'm a BMX. I'm not a 10-speed bicycle. All you can do is pedal. Like, so if something's bad, don't pedal at all. Just put that aside. And I think the other thing, like what was super helpful to me was to have something I could pour energy into and become addicted to instead, which for me was podcasting and trying to launch that career. I had something that I could nurture and build and see the results from. But like before I even did, like one thing that one therapist told me, like I was like, I get into this negative cycling, and I'm sitting there looking at the Insta or the Facebook, and I'm like, F this person's life. And he's like, why don't you just look for things to celebrate instead of be pissed off at? Like, just start liking stuff. Just a simple act of just liking it. You don't need to just comment. Instead of thinking like snarky ass replies or ways to be funny or negative, just be good at first. Like, just put positive freaking energy, not toxic positive, but like just like some stuff. Don't look at things and like let them get you angry. If they do, put it aside. And that's really how I initially started like really growing my social presence, because I'm like, okay, I'm just going to positively connect with people.
Yeah.
Before that, I was like a drunk internet troll. Like, I didn't make any friends doing that. Also, you start helping people and start being a good person. Oh, wow. Okay. You start opening the archway and you realize that like you can be successful doing this. And I think it's important that you start so that you can see what actually happens when you do it.
Yeah. Is there something that you regained that maybe you lost along the way in your recovery?
Yeah, I think myself and my timeline, because when you're locked into addiction, like those years just they start flying by. You're in like maintenance mode. You're trying to make sure, some sort of status quo that can maintain your addiction stays, instead of like, how do I grow to be as big and as awesome as possible? Your thought is like, how do I maintain this crappy state of existence? And you want to destroy that. If your mind is caught up in that and you find yourself like you only want to go places because there's alcohol, you only want to go there, but you probably have a problem, and maybe it's just your social. And I'm not saying everyone has the same one I do, but like, realize this. You're in sales. You start waking up the next morning. You're like, what's the big deal if I put a shot of whiskey in the coffee? What's the big deal if I have the mimosa at noon, or I have a vodka orange juice at noon? You are going down an incredibly bad path. This is not a normal way to behave at all. And it's the way that alcoholics behave. It's the way that I behaved. You start hiding things from family. We become very, very good at tricking people.
Oh, yeah.
Incredibly good. The only thing that catches us is like booze kind of stinks, so people can like smell it on you.
Oh, yeah. And I was one of those. I got to the point where I was waking up and having like half a bottle of wine with breakfast on my way out the door to work, and keeping alcohol in my car and going on a walk at lunch, like that. I could not make it a whole day, and then I would try to control it, right? Well, I'll just drink in the evenings. I'll just drink on weekends. I'll just drink this type instead of that type. And I think if I'm putting that much energy and trying to plan around my alcohol, that's a problem.
It convinced me. Like, for you, it sounds like it was social too, because you're social anxiety too. It's like part of drinking. It opens you up, makes it easier to talk to people. Like, mine convinced me that I couldn't be social or likable without it. That's how deep it got. And that's how much it hijacks your brain.
And creative. For me, there was a part of me that felt like it was a creative, it like enhanced my creativity when I was doing certain things, which is absolute crap. Here I am, and a creative world is my professional world at this point as a totally sober person.
Every single drug addict I met in Hollywood when we were in our early 20s would say some BS like that. Like, I'm only taking this drug when I get creative. I only take it at night. And then like, very shortly after they say something like that, you start noticing them. They're messed up during the day. They're messed up when they're in your car. They're messed up maybe when they're driving. It's like it comes on quick. And that's one of the warning signs too. If you start saying, okay, this is like an enhancement, this is a performance enhancing drug, your brain has already messed with you.
Yep. It's true. And so, that's why I think it's important also in these conversations to talk about, like, how did we know? How did we get started? And it sounds like for both of us, it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that kind of creeps up on you, and you don't really know you're an alcoholic until you really know you're an alcoholic. And I think the same goes for your sober walk. It doesn't happen overnight. And you don't really feel good in your sobriety until you kind of wake up one day and you're like, holy crap, like I'm doing it. I'm sober and I feel good. And like, my problems today are nothing in comparison to what they used to be when I was like, I don't fear for my days. I don't have this like dread every morning. And that happened, about a year, 2 years in for me.
It makes you feel And if you can survive over that 2-year period, it makes you feel super strong. And I know I said it's the hardest at first. That first year or two, super hard. But once you get through it, you've beat, or at least you're still fighting, your toughest opponent you'll ever face, which is yourself and your mind that controls you. And if you can lock that demon, deep down in the hell in the bottom of your brain, nobody can mess with you. Nobody can screw. You've already been through anything there is, and you understand how to get to the other side. And that's an important skill to learn too. And that alone is one of the reasons to go on this journey.
Yeah, I personally think that every sober person has these superpowers that like the normies out there don't have. Maybe they'll have access to it, but I do. I think that we tap into something in ourselves that is just so magnetic, and I just think we're all walking miracles, and we have these superpowers. And to your earlier point, now we get to use them for good. What is that going to look like? And I think that that's the place that I'm at in my recovery right now, and I love being in this place.
I mean, that's one thing I really love about alcoholics and drug addicts. A lot of times, like, they are incredibly active-minded people that are super creative. A lot of times they have like ADD or maybe some anxiety, and they've been blunting that. They've been blunting it for years. They've been washing it down with vodka across their blade. And then you see them when they get sober, and like, these people can run through brick walls. Like, because now they're not contained by this. They're not busy hiding away, getting freaking trashed in a closet, or, avoiding all these other stuff. Like, they're constantly especially people who kind of like get addicted to the work. They're like, I got to replace it with like work or something. You see like output go through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. And, I think that that's exactly what you did. And so I just want to face, thank you for setting such a strong example of what that can look like. I think it's really, really important.
I mean, that's why that was sort of the pay it forward that the TEDx was. The pay it forward to my boss, who was open to me many, many years ago about his addiction. And I realized that that's the life lesson. It's like, if someone, you admire or look up to or see is successful, and they went through that and still are, that's important. And that's why I thought it was important to the freight community. I don't think I'm glad you're doing the show. I don't think there's enough voices that speak to, this level of addiction. And, unfortunately, as it may be, like, I've never had a single company book me to come talk about like addiction. They don't care that much. I'm not saying you guys don't care, but nobody's even bothered, even though it's such a big topic in this industry. And I feel like a lot of times we turn a blind eye.
Yeah. And what I've heard, because I talked with somebody who's a sober advocate, and her industry is the dental industry. And she has this whole other world that she's in of event planning and coordinating. And she said something that she's learned along the way of beginning that kind of side hustle that is now a career path is every industry thinks it's the most rampant in their industry, which lets us know that it is so much more common than we realize and that we give it credit for.
My boys just walked in the door. I was like, hey, boys. I need to throw a finger at you. They're walking through. They're like, who are you talking to? I'm like, I'm on this show, man. You guys go have fun. You guys have fun over there. They're playing on a trampoline.
Oh, good. I love that you have an indoor trampoline. That's great.
No, I don't. So my neighborhood is awesome. Like, you read online and they're like, you can't have kids anymore, and they don't have friends, and nobody hangs out, nobody knocks on each other's door, and everyone's on like, and I'm like, what? You just don't live in a neighborhood where other kids live that are your kids' age.
Yeah.
Like, I got like 2 boys that live across the street that are my kids' age. They got a big trampoline. There's nothing better. Like, it's like a boat, right? The only thing better than like the best trampoline you can own is your neighbors. Like, the best boat you can own is your best friends. You don't want to own that stuff. I don't want to maintain the damn trampoline, but they can walk right across the street and go play on that thing. But the whole neighborhood's like that. It's easy to stay sober when you've got like that to look at too.
Yeah.
Not the trampoline, the kids.
I don't know. The trampoline helps.
Yeah.
Well, we're over time, but that's totally fine. This has been such a great conversation. Dooner, if somebody has questions about sobriety, maybe they're not ready to come out and talk about it publicly, but they want to know that they have somebody in their corner, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, if you want to reach me personally, privately, journalist. I won't say anything publicly. You want to reach me privately, or your company, you want me to come speak to your people, or any way you want to reach me, I'm always on social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, Timothy Dooner. That's Dooner. I'm very active on X at Timothy Dooner. Again, Dooner. Dooner@firecrown.com if you want to email me, if you're more comfortable doing that. And yeah, reach out, or just comment on social media. Or if you want to stay private, just send the DM. But more than happy to talk anytime.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and for just kind of going back and forth about what sobriety really looks like, because it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes I like to talk about the ugly because it's awkward, but it is just so good. And like I said, I just really appreciate the path that you've carved out loud for others to see that it can be done, and it can be done well and with a lot of joy.
Let's keep amplifying each other on this topic. The industry needs it. Any industry you touch needs it. Anything What the Truck touches, I touch on social media, needs to know that they're, and I hate to use the term safe space, especially in this era where people freak out about terms or you being woke, but it's like, look, people need a place to talk about this where they're not going to get crapped upon by the boys or looked down upon. Not everyone's ready to be public. Not everyone's out here trying to like inspire people or just doesn't care. Like I've beat tougher. You can talk all the crap you want about me. I got the biggest jerk in my head right here. Like, there's nobody meaner than what's in here. Okay, so you guys can sit the F down.
Well, then maybe we'll plan a follow-up episode and talk about, a different version of what this looks like, and some more of just our stories.
Yeah, stop by. So at Matt's, right? I'll be at the Truck Parking Club booth at noon Eastern time on Friday doing a live show. Stop by. Would love to have you come on, say hello.
That sounds great. All right, and to everybody else, we'll see you next week.